People are still going to come in, but I'll keep admitting them, Frank.
So Angela, because I'm co-host, do I have to admit people, or do you have
No,
to?
I'll take care of it.
Okay.
I think you can start.
Great, it's 11 o'clock, so let's get started. Thank you for attending Bar Talk. Our guest today is Justin Andrus, the Executive Director of the Maine Commission on Indigent Legal Services. Before we get to Justin, I just want to touch on a couple of things. First of all, our Summer Bar Conference, Maine State Bar Association Summer Bar Conference, is June 15 to 17 in Bar Harbor. Please register if you'd like to come sooner rather than later. It's only a week away. We think we have a really fun, interesting bar conference that includes a cruise in Frenchman's Bay on Thursday night. And so please attend. The room block is full, but there's lots of inns, B&Bs, and hotels in that immediate neighborhood. If you need help with finding accommodations, give me a call or send me an email, and I'm glad to help. And then we take a little hiatus for Bar Talk for the summer, and we'll be back September 14th. Angela, do we have a guest yet? Not yet. We have a few promising leads, but we don't have a guest yet. So Justin, thank you so much for joining us today. Justin, as I just mentioned, is the Executive Director of the Maine Commission on Indigent Legal Services, or as some people call it, MICSLS or MCILS. Before I turn it over to Justin here, I just want to personally thank you, Justin, for what I think has been a pretty tremendous job in very, very trying circumstances over the last couple of years. So the way we'll do this, folks, is Justin's going to have some remarks. I've got 4 or 5 topics that I just want to ask Justin about, give him the opportunity to weigh in on. And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. We've already received a number of questions from people ahead of time. So we'll go through those, and then we'll take any from the people attending today. If you have a question, put it in the chat, send it directly to me in the chat, and then I'll field those questions as they come in. If you don't like typing in the chat and you want to send me an email, that's fine as well. My email is fbishop, FBISHOP @hudco, HUDCO.com. So I've got my Outlook open, and if you want to send me an email, I can handle questions that way. So without further ado, Justin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. I'm going to try not to preach for very long, because I think the vast majority of people who are interested in what MCILS is doing have had the opportunity to hear from us in the past. I do want to give a little bit of update on how we're doing. It's become my thing to make public statements that prove useful to my friend Mr. Hayden in the audience. So we'll do that this morning. And then I'll open it up to questions. And the questions can be as sort of general about what we're doing or precise as anyone is interested in. As always, if there are folks who have questions or concerns and want to discuss them with me offline, please bring them to me. I don't pretend to have any of the right answers to what we're doing. I'm open to every challenge and every piece of input. For those who don't know, MCILS is the agency that provides court-appointed counsel, court-assigned counsel to consumers of indigent legal services. We have existed for about 10 years, and in the last year and a half, we've been trying to evolve from a place of relative informality to a place where we're doing a better job of being able to guarantee the quality and level of service that the attorneys we have provide. That's not to say that the services that came before were not at that quality, but rather that we're trying to be able to demonstrate that quality and provide the support to people to do as well or better as they've done in the past. We're in trouble. I've been saying for quite a long time that we're in trouble. In 2019, in May 20th, 2019 was the last date we ran numbers. There were 410 attorneys in Maine accepting assignments to represent indigent defendants. Today, there are 234. The ranks were already shrinking due to the pressures of practice, the inadequate compensation, and sort of the environment in which assigned counsel found themselves operating in 2019. A lot of people began leaving long before the effects of the pandemic. I was one of them. I was an assigned counsel in 2019. I closed my office. I always say to my attorneys, and I say it again now, as they struggle with the things that they're dealing with, I have a great deal of empathy for that. We see it. I know it. I've experienced it even before it got as bad as it is now, and decided it wasn't something I could do. And so the reality is that we need to begin to fix that, and we need to begin it immediately, and we need to fix it quickly, or we're going to fail to staff cases. MCLS has 31,000 or so open cases at this time. The rate at which we are being asked to open cases is escalating. Our historical average was about 26,000 cases. Last year, it was 28,000 cases. And by the end of June, I expect it to well exceed 31,000 cases. So that's a radical increase in the number of new cases coming in during a time when we have roughly half the population of lawyers to serve the cases. And all of that's occurring against a backlog that in the unified criminal docket is persisting. The last numbers I received on that subject were also May 20th. And on that day, the year over 2019 pre-pandemic caseload for felonies was up 83.3%. It was up 61.1% for misdemeanors. So you've got this radical surge in the number of pending cases, radical surge in the number of cases coming in, and you've got a decrease in the number of attorneys serving. So we need your help. We need you as members of the bar, as the Bar Association, to help us, to advocate for parity of resources, to advocate for making it possible for attorneys to serve these clients in a manner that's consistent with a reasonable professional and personal life, because we need more people to come in. And we don't need to just fill bleachers. We need people to come in who are dedicated to serving the population of consumers of indigent legal services. Hanks happens to be on my screen. And since the day I met him many, many years ago, he's been one of those people dedicated to doing this. That's who we need. But we need to make it possible for people to do that, either as assigned attorneys, if that's the preference, or to have the option of being employed attorneys. We also need support to be able to enhance our internal operations, to provide better training, specific training, attorney-specific training at times, if an attorney wants or needs to learn something, and to allow us to provide the support to ensure that the quality of services are what they should be. And so that's my pitch. Please, we need you as members of the bar to go to bat and make sure that the executive and the legislature and anyone you have contact to understands that this service is vital, that has the potential to serve every Mainer, that no Mainer knows whether that person will be charged with a crime, or if so, whether that person is going to have access to resources. I don't care what socioeconomic class a person believes they're in. They're a potential constituent of our organization, and the only check for the population against the exercise of that executive prosecution power. So we need you to recognize that importance. We need you to communicate that importance. And as we come into the next legislative cycle, I don't know whether we're going to make it there, staffing all of our cases, but we need that help. So I'll stop preaching and hit me with questions if you have some.
So Justin, I do want to come back around to how we can help, meaning the MSBA and the attorneys that are on the phone here. But first, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the Rural Public Defender Unit, which was actually funded by the legislature, where you're at in the hiring process, how that's going to work from an office kind of supervisory point of view. I'm really curious to see how that's going to be implemented.
So we are really excited to have broken the seal and have the opportunity to add the capacity to have employed attorneys as part of our sort of a hybrid system, utilizing assigned attorneys as well. There's a long process of going through the Bureau of Human Resources to get positions approved and then authorized for posting. We're in that process, and we're waiting for that authority to post to come back, and then we'll post them up immediately. We're going to have 5 people. They're going to be across 3 jobs. The top of that pyramid is going to be a person who's sort of equivalent to an elected district attorney. We call that role a district defender. And then 2 roles each for what we hope will be experienced attorneys who want to join the program, and newer attorneys who are dedicated to the work, who want to be trained up internally and do the work. The official office for that unit is going to be downstairs in our building at 187 State Street. Practically speaking, I don't yet know where folks are going to sit on a given day. The idea is that these folks would be itinerant. If somebody who's working in the program is residing somewhere local to where there's a need, that may have an impact on how often they have to come and be in the office here. We haven't sorted that out yet. These folks are essentially an emergency squad. Think about them like EMTs. The idea is that we see a need and we can dispatch people to address it. It's 5 people in a program that used to take 410 to operate. It's smaller caseloads. So they're going to have a relatively small proportionate impact on the caseload overall. They're also going to have a somewhat reduced caseload individually because built into their process is the idea that they're going to be itinerant. And so there'll be more travel there than might otherwise be the case. We've gotten some great interest from people interested in joining the program. I can identify them here yet. And once the process of hiring starts, then we can't have those kinds of informal conversations, but there is significant interest. And so we're hoping we'll be able to staff them up pretty quickly.
So is it premature for people to reach out to you if they're interested in the director, the regional director position, or should they wait until it's posted? Is there any benefit to contacting you now?
So if folks have questions about what their world might look like if they join the program, they can ask me those questions now. Once I post the job or the jobs, that will have to stop until we get into the interview process. But because the jobs haven't been posted at this point, we wouldn't be having interviews, and we wouldn't be taking applications. But I'm certainly would be happy to discuss with anyone how it might work, how they see it working. Whomever we hire, that will help me develop the program, and certainly I want applicants. People have an interest but a concern. Yeah, please address it to me. Let's figure out how to make it work.
And those other 4 positions, do you have a sense of years of experience or not yet?
With specificity, the positions are budgeted to be similar to district attorney positions. At the same rates, same grades, same steps. So the district defender would be paid on the same pay scale as an elected district attorney. District attorneys go through a process where they start in one grade and then step, and then at some point step up to a different grade and step. And so we've got 2 positions at each of those 2 steps. And so we could work with somebody coming out of law school to train them the way that offices of the district attorneys do that. We could work with people in the middle of their career. We're sort of open on that.
It's going to be fascinating, and I'm excited to see you get this started. If you don't mind, I would like to talk a little bit about the legislative process in the last session. Just for people on the phone, the MSBA did testify before both the Judiciary and the Appropriations Committee in favor of full funding for MCILS. And the Judiciary Committee endorsed that full funding for MCILS and recommended to the Appropriations Committee that MCILS receive the funding that it asked for. However, Appropriations did not give MCILS the full funding, which was a surprise to us here. Justin, do you want to comment on the legislative process? And it was disappointing from our perspective, but I'd like to hear yours.
We really appreciated the work of the Judiciary Committee. So let me just back up. As you probably all know, but just in case not, with the biennial budget process and the budget in the second year of the biennium is not really an opportunity to start that over. So in 2020, the commission floated a budget request, and we've always sort of had to work to some extent within those constraints. What we did with the Judiciary Committee was really expand beyond that into stuff that would have been a supplemental budget, which makes it that much more remarkable, frankly, that committee was really interested and engaged in doing that. And they supported a lot of improvements, including again, an increase to the rate of assigned counsel pay to try and bring parity for assigned counsel in with their state counterparts and some other programs. We have difficulty. We have difficulty with appropriations. We have difficulty in the executive in sort of making our case for why we need the funding that we continue to ask for. We are thrilled to have gotten some of it, but I wasn't terribly surprised. I was hopeful going into the appropriations process, but not terribly surprised. This year, we're again working to produce a budget package that really explains what we want and why we need it and why it's essential, not sort of luxury to achieve the things we want to achieve. That comes out later in the summer. And so we're hoping that we can produce something that the executive will make part of the next executive budget. And that, you know, we won't be relegated to having to go through asking for supplemental funding through judiciary in the same form.
So I think one of the takeaways I had from the Judiciary Committee was that the support for Mixels for MCILS was bipartisan, and it was robust. And so I think that shows that if we, the attorneys here in Maine, can contact our peers, can contact legislators that we know, can contact people in the executive branch, that if we make this, we the attorneys, make this a priority politically to make sure that Mixels gets funded, that there can be bipartisan consensus around supporting it. That was, maybe I'm too much of an optimist, but that was my takeaway from what happened with the Judiciary Committee over the last 2 years. I don't know if you feel differently.
No, I agree with that. Or yes, I agree with that. We had remarkable bipartisan support. And in last year, the supplemental budget things that we asked for was not only bipartisan support, it was unanimous legislative support. It's not a partisan issue. The Sixth Amendment applies to everyone of every political persuasion. And so it was really excellent. And it was really, you know, a time when things are particularly fractious. To see that bipartisan support from judiciary in particular this year was fantastic. Maine has a long tradition since long before I was starting practicing, but in my experience of supporting legal representation for people who cannot afford that representation, access to justice, Maine Bar Foundation, Cumberland Legal Aid, Pine Tree VLP, the Katahdin Award Program. We have a long, very robust tradition of supporting access to justice for Mainers who can't afford legal representation. But it's almost all on the civil side. And so it's really time to recognize that what MCILS does is equally important, constitutionally requires, perhaps more important, but at least equally important. And that's where you come in. We appreciated your support, your testimony, you being the MSBA here. But for all of you individuals who are here, we need that support because we need to alter the perspective that somehow what the people that MCILS serves and the cases that we serve are not as worthy of that support as the civil stuff, that is well supported.
So you mentioned, Justin, 234 rostered attorneys currently, which is roughly almost half of what it was just a few years ago. What can we, the MSBA, do to encourage Maine attorneys who are qualified to take criminal defense cases to join the roster? Are there ways that we as an organization could help support that, or maybe the law firms in Maine could support that? What are your thoughts about how to build that roster? I mean, other than offering a higher level of hourly pay, obviously. It seems like it's going to be necessary, given the numbers that you gave earlier, that roster has to grow.
So there's a tension. There's always a tension between trying to bring people in and making sure the quality of services is what it needs to be. And so what I would hope is that attorneys practicing and firms practicing would agree to support members of their firms who are interested in becoming properly educated and qualified to do the work. It can't be that it can't be dabbling. And unfortunately, we appreciate that kind of interest, but it doesn't work, right? Somebody needs to be trained up, they need to be supervised, and they need to be qualified and competent. And so, but I hope that firms will allow those folks who are interested in doing that to do that. And there's compensation for it, but it would be essentially partially a contribution to ensuring that the work gets done. A lot of the firms, big and small, they do a lot of VLP work, or they'll do, cover things for Pine Tree. I used to do conflict things for Pine Tree. And so this is not different in principle. And we'll offer the training, and we'll make the opportunities for attorneys who are interested in becoming genuinely competent and qualified to have co-counseling opportunities with qualified counsel to learn, see how it's done, see how the work should be performed, participate. And I say this all the time, actually. I think everything that goes to trial now here under our program should have co-counsel. People should be learning, they should be there, they should be seeing how it works. And 2 sets of eyes and 2 brains are always better anyway. So we can support an office or a firm or an individual who's interested in assisting in becoming qualified to do that. To the extent that a big firm sees that as pro bono work, we can subsidize that. Because it's not truly pro bono, but and I hope some will take us up on that.
Thanks, Justin. We do have some questions, and some of the questions are obviously about the ACLU lawsuit.
Sure.
So maybe to start off with, would you mind talking a little bit about the relationship with the Attorney General's office who's defending the lawsuit, to the extent that you want or can talk about that?
I can talk about it somewhat. So as explained to us, it is the perspective of the Office of the Attorney General that it has the prerogative and perhaps the obligation to assume the direction in the lawsuit. And that's what's happened. So the Office of the Attorney General has assigned a trial attorney to represent the state in the lawsuit, and that's what that attorney is doing. Generally speaking, that we don't have input into the litigation direction, and so we're not the client in the same sense that probably many or most of you have clients and take client direction. I think the best way to look at that is in the court's recent decision granting in part and denying in part the state's motion to dismiss the lawsuit. There's a footnote talking about that relationship, but so that's the relationship, and we appreciate that work, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the work that the commission or any commissioner that I would have directed if we were individual clients.
Thank you. So if folks, I'm gonna start fielding the questions that have come in. If folks have questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can send me an email at fbishop@hudco.com. So we have a number of questions here about the ACLU lawsuit. How can and you made some of these questions maybe are not answerable from an MIXL's perspective, but we'll take them as they come. How can the ACLU not press for immediate mediation efforts as suggested by Commissioner Schneider if the class of clients the ACLU purports to represent continue to be deprived of effective assistance of counsel as alleged in the complaint?
It's really a question for Attorney Hayden, who's present, and I'd give him the floor if he wants it. But I hope that we will very shortly all engage in a dialogue about how to get to a resolution. It's a dialogue I had, since the beginning of my time here with anyone who will do it, including, to be fair, Attorney Hayden, before the lawsuit. And so can't answer the question as posed, but I'm certainly open on my side to that conversation. I don't have anything scheduled this afternoon.
With the system in crisis and without millions of needed funds and no semblance of parity, and with the system over the cliff, quote unquote, over the cliff, how are the interests of the class served by protracted litigation? This seems kind of similar vein to the prior question.
So I can't answer it as posed exactly, but I can say that I'm in favor of every process that will move us closer to resolution faster rather than slower. That's formal or informal conversation with the in suit. I'm open to that. If that's sitting down with the governor this afternoon, I'm open to that. If that's sitting down with the legislative leads, and I don't know which are up for re-election, which aren't, but with the hope that they're available for the conversation next year, I'm open to that. If it's recall the legislature, I'm open to that. I don't see any reason that there should have been any need for any of the delay that's occurred in the last, at least in the last 18 months since we've started screaming for what we need.
That's well said. And when we talk about the adequate funding for Mixels, your current budget is $28 million?
It's about $28 million. We also received a $4 million award in ARPA funds, but I don't think of them in the budget in the same way, especially because they carry forward sort of for a while for an as needed basis.
And so in your mind, what is the figure that would be adequate? If Mixels was adequately funded, what would that budget number be?
So I have a number, and I'm going to explain it in a second. Before I answer this is the staff answer. Okay, the commission ultimately develops its budget. I assist with that and submits a budget. The commission has not submitted a budget going into the next biennium, and so we occasionally disagree about things and occasionally ask for different things differently. In my view, the number is $60 million. It is $60 million almost no matter how I arrive at a constitutionally adequate program. I've looked at increasing the assigned counsel rate, relying entirely on assigned counsel rate. I've looked at what it costs to put defenders all sorts of places. I've looked at hybridization, where we apportion some amount of the caseload to paid defenders, and the remainder, which could be 80%, it could be less, goes to assigned counsel. No matter how I do it, that number comes out to about $60 million. And so maybe there's some economy somewhere that I haven't seen. I'm always open to being shown that. But it represents, about $22 a taxpayer.
$22 per taxpayer.
Additional, or per citizen rather. We look at per capita in the industry, the public defense industry. We frequently talk about the per capita allocation of resources to the defense function. So that increases $22.
And so again, I'm sorry, I'll sound like I'm a record on repeat here, but when you're asking when we're asking the legislature for $22 million additional dollars, that's not going to be an easy lift, I don't think, especially given what we've seen in the last 2 years. So again, for the lawyers on this phone who care about this issue, it is absolutely essential that we lobby our friends, colleagues, representatives, and folks in the executive branch, whichever party wins, because without the loud support of lawyers in Maine, it's not going to get funded. So they need to hear from us in a personal way, in a political way. I have a question from ADA Carlos Diaz. Can you identify any ways in which Maine prosecutors can be of assistance in addressing this crisis?
Well, the big one, and when I bring this, prosecutors are not always open to it, and so I understand that. But cases that don't absolutely need to be prosecuted should be dismissed. And there isn't a road, as I see it, to getting all of the caseload issues, the backlog, the surge in cases, or the attorney case volume situation under control otherwise. A lot of the issue with the backlog is of no one in the system's fault. I just want to make sure that's really clear. I don't speak for the courts, but my understanding is that courts are moving cases as promptly as they can. they have resource issues, and support for justice and access to justice here also means support for the courts and making sure that they have the resources to be able to have all their courts open, all their courts staffed, and the best opportunity to serve the people of the state of Maine the way that they do. And similarly, for us, if we have more people, we can have fewer we wind up with conflicts across courts that result in inefficiency. So all of that stuff's really sort of out of our control. The only thing that any constituency has the ability to control is the absolute caseload. And that's the thing where I hope prosecutors will really consider what needs to go forward and what doesn't. I don't get a vote in that, I know, but I'm not sure how else to solve the problem. I will say to the prosecutors, and Carlos, thank you for asking. If there's something that you see that we could do differently, we're making our own problem that I may not be aware of, please pick up the phone, because we're always open to, sort of being redirected.
Justin, we're going to go past 11:30 here. Would you mind sticking around for a few minutes? Great. I won't keep you too much longer. Okay, so again, these are questions that may be difficult for you to answer. How can the AG's office continue to serve as counsel given the myriad of disqualifying conflicts the AG faces?
So I don't want to get into a conflict analysis, in part because it would implicate privilege stuff. I will say that I've asked repeatedly for separate counsel, and that request hasn't been honored. That request is discretionary with that office. I respect that at the moment. But I agree with the proposition that someone at MCILS, if not someone's, should have some form of voice in directing the litigation. When I say should, that should be read as my preference would be, as opposed to the law requires. I think should could have been ambiguous there.
So it's a good answer, Justin. How can the organized bar, i.e. the MSBA and MACDL, MACDL, continue to stand by and not be heard before the court in the executive and legislative branches in some meaningful and creative way? That seems like a question for me. I would respectfully disagree with the idea that we haven't participated in a meaningful way. And we're going to continue to advocate really at the legislature and at the executive branch to make sure the funding gets done here. Without the funding, there's no path forward as far as I can see. So we testified before both the Judiciary and the Appropriations Committee in support of the Justin's proposals. We also petitioned the legislature over a course of years to get a seat at the table. So we have a non-voting member of MCILS. So I think we've been working and focused on this for a few years. I think we could do a better job, and we won't have succeeded until it's adequately funded. So I'm all ears about how to help, and love to hear from members if they have great ideas. How long will the citizen, again, this may be a philosophical question. How long will the citizens of Maine continue to abide in actual denial of due process being imposed on even one individual who is accused of criminal conduct but cannot afford a lawyer? It seems to me that the political process keeps answering that question in negative, unfortunately. So I don't know what else we can do except to petition an executive to put a line item in the budget that is adequate. I don't know if you have other thoughts about that, Justin.
I mean, I can't speak to the global political problem of the people of the state of Maine not making this their primary campaign issue. I certainly wish they would, but there are lots of other things I know. I think we just need to continue to pursue that adequate funding. You said you don't see a solution without that adequate funding a moment ago. And that's right. There's no road without adequate funding. Adequate funding means creating an environment for people willing to practice to discharge the state's obligation. Until we have more money to do that, we're not going to be able to do that. There's a lot of sort of inference as we talk about funding, particularly for the assigned bar, that there's a sense of being beholden to the attorneys, and there's a sense of the attorneys are somehow greedy. Let's be clear that what you have is 234 people remaining willing to obligate themselves to assume the obligation of the state. Not one of them has to do this. These people do this because they believe in it. These people do this because it's really good work that needs to be done. And we need to stop any part of the narrative that comes down that somehow, it's gripping. The prosecutors operate with approximately 1-to-1 staff to prosecutor ratios. You look at it statewide, it's different from office to office. If you look just at what a beginner prosecutor and staff person get with their benefits and their salary, those people earn enough and cost enough together that the rate would have to be over $100 an hour. At $80 an hour, there's not even parity at a staffing level. And at that point, there's no money to operate an office. So when we talk about the funding, people aren't getting rich doing indigent defense. I've asked for $150 an hour. I intend to continue to ask for $150 an hour. That may be a staff position, that may be the commission's perspective. $150 an hour, when you look at all of the costs and things that a state attorney gets, works out to a $72,000 a year salary, $72,000. And $72,000 is a decent salary in Maine overall, but it's not an outrageous attorney salary by any means, and it's typical for a prosecutor. And so that needs to happen. When we're still talking about funding and limits at $80 an hour, we're talking about asking people to practice at a loss if they are going to have the things they should have, the ability to take a reasonable amount of time off, health insurance, life insurance. Half my attorneys don't have life insurance, health insurance. My folks don't have staff supporting them. ABA standards, and we're being sued for not having a caseload standard. We're working on it. But every standard out there assumes that staff tasks are being done by staff. And so all of those things need to happen. That comes back to what you said. Without the funding, it doesn't happen. But I don't think, to answer the question, that it's the people of the state of Maine who are going to get there in their individual roles. I think we're going to have to convince their representatives that it's necessary.
Right. I think it's us have to make our voices heard if there's going to be a change. So I have one last question. I'm going to reframe it a little bit. Generally, the new proposals regarding MCILS seem to make MCILS a regulatory and investigatory body, or akin to one. We're already regulated by the Board of Bar Overseers. So is the investigatory oversight regulatory role of MCILS, could it be perceived as a deterrent to some attorneys for joining the roster, perhaps?
Could be. Is it a reasonable deterrent? No. So there are two very substantial differences between MCILS and the Board of Overseers. First, a client in most of the legal world can choose their attorney. A client in most of the indigent defense world cannot. And so the standard for who can be allowed to provide services to consumers of indigent legal services must be higher than the baseline standard to be allowed to have a law license. Because otherwise we risk foisting somebody who's not acceptable or not adequate on a client. And our attorneys generally are. They meet that standard. But it's not a challenge to them. But that's why it's different. The other thing is we don't pull anybody's law license. I'm a state agency head. My job is essentially, in part, to allocate state contracts. When we do that, the question of whether we find the manner in which the contract is fulfilled acceptable is actually a wholly different question to whether or not the person is engaged in conduct which would violate the rules of professional responsibility. We might find that violating those rules leads to an inadequate performance under the contract, but they're very different standards. They're different standards for both the regulatory reason, but more importantly for the adequacy of counsel proposition where people are not able to choose their own counsel.
Justin, thank you very much. Really appreciate it, especially the additional time that you gave us today. As Justin said, he likes to hear from you. He wants to hear from you. So don't hesitate to contact him. I feel the same way. So if people out there have ideas, suggestions, comments, feel free to send them to me directly, fbishop@hudco.com. And thank you so much for attending today. Hopefully we'll see you June 15th to 17th in Bar Harbor. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.